Hello and good afternoon, everyone. So I am Cheryl-Ann Boodram, and I'm joined by my co-researcher.
Here we go. Good day, everyone. My name is Valeria. I am a first-generation university graduate from McGill, and I had the honor of working with Dr. Boodram over this past summer.
And I just want to say that this project that we're going to talk about is really a good example of meeting the ideals of the Canada-Caribbean Partnership, in that while I'm the principal investigator, we were very fortunate that Val joined us as a co-researcher because of her sponsorship by the Queen Elizabeth Scholars Program. So I want to acknowledge that as we move. So today we're going to talk a little bit about our projects. It's still in progress, but we're sharing our background and our initial findings. The name of the project is called Towards Building Community Resilience, Examining Disaster Literacy Levels of Residents in Communities Affected by Repeated Flooding in Trinidad and Tobago. This would be my agenda for today. I'm not going to go through it. I guess we can all read it, but because we only have 10 minutes, we'll go quickly into the presentation. So as we know, Latin America and the Caribbean region is rated as the second most disaster-prone region in the world. And flooding has become a significant issue for countries in the Caribbean and also for my country, Trinidad and Tobago. Now, growing up, I would be very accustomed to having floods, maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 to 3 years. But we have had significant increases in the intensity and the frequency of flooding within the past decade. And so therefore, this warrants investigation. As we move on. So this country, this is the map of Trinidad and Tobago, and you would see that circled area there. That area is called the Penal-Debe region, and we focused our study in the Penal-Debe region. And I just wanted to share some pictures of flooding that has taken place to show you just how severe it can be. And our study is not only about flooding that happens once and done and comes back next 5 years, but we have had significant problems because we have had repeated floodings in the same community. And so our current situation, the Penal-Debe region, the area that I just highlighted, has been affected by the flooding, and the amount of losses has really been significant. In 2018, for instance, we incurred in one flooding episode alone losses of 750,000 TT. In terms of business losses, and domestic residents experienced losses of 60,000. This is only for one episode, and in that year, we had severe flooding in this particular community 3 to 4 times during our rainy season. Along with the loss of money, there is severe disruptions to the well-being of people, to education, to the social life, to the economy and agricultural activities. And just how does this impact on our social life and our day-to-day living? Val will tell you, when it starts to rain, people in these communities become fearful. They tend not to go to work. They keep the children at home because they're very fearful that children are stranded or they're not able to return from their place of work. So there is a need for us to build community resilience and to prevent, to prepare, and to respond. And one way of building community resilience is by increasing the disaster literacy levels of people within communities.
So, as far as the relevant literature within our study, mainly what is disaster literacy, right? So first and foremost, we wanted to have everyone be on the same page, basically, about what it is and how it's just a core component towards disaster preparedness and management in general. So, okay, you guys can repeat after me, all right? Mitigation. Mitigation, okay. Preparedness, right? Response. And then last, recovery. It's not just one thing, folks. It is so, so important to identify like the interconnectedness between each phase. And so that's kind of what we wanted to highlight in this. And then within that as well, this capital-based approach where there are 5 main categories, so economic, physical, human, natural, and then particularly social capital as well, just because in the context of community resilience, it reflects our social networks and our trust within people, for example, because when you are faced with a natural disaster, in this case flooding, who is there first? Yourself and your family, those who are immediately around you, and then afterwards it's, first like emergency response teams, so on and so forth. So we wanted to pay particular interest towards the social capital. So then over here are just some of the research questions that we had in mind. So in just a sec, we'll talk about the methodology, but we did do like a mixed methods approach, so surveys and interviews, and basically figure out, possibly where they're receiving their information from. So is it via word of mouth, or is it social media? Is the regional corporation, municipal government, the ones who are letting the people know about the flooding disasters, so on and so forth, as different people will have different lived experiences. And so that's really what we wanted to tackle here. And this is exactly what I was just talking about. This is a little bit of the timeline. So we had to identify our participants and things like that, so we honed in on that specific location, and then we did our survey, and then we conducted some interviews, so pretty straightforward there. You can't see it on the screen, but just how I was saying before, we also asked possibly what occupation do you have as well. So basically, are you in the agriculture sector? Are you a business owner? Things like that, because these different stakeholders, they'll again have different levels of relevance as far as that goes, and then education level as well. So that's the only 2 that you can't see on there.
Okay, so just a little bit about the demographics. We did interviews, and we're reporting now on the results of the interviews. We did interviews with 35 people, 24 women and 11 men. They were business owners, teachers, farmers, represented persons in the people who are unemployed and other professionals as well. And so we moved to our findings, and we found this to be particularly interesting. Participants believe that severe flooding is caused by changes in weather patterns, poor infrastructure, poor disposal of garbage. But the next thing we found was that participants did not connect repeated flooding to climate change. And we thought, so you're connecting the repeated flooding episodes to changing weather, but not to climate change. And we recognized that that was a gap in the disaster literacy of persons, and maybe perhaps in our approach, or the approach by government and other sectors in terms of educating people. Information about disasters and climate change resilience was taught but disseminated in silos. Many people believed that the problem of flooding could not be addressed by themselves, but really wanted government intervention, because they thought that repeated flooding could only be addressed from a governmental approach. So there was a feeling that flooding is inevitable, and therefore little could be done to prevent and mitigate. Their preparation, therefore, to dealing with flooding was limited, and very few families have a preparation or safety plan. What was interesting for us is that persons' level of disaster literacy operated as a basic level, as a level 1, not level 2, which would be functional literacy, where they could comprehend and perhaps action some things, although they may not have autonomy to do that or feel that they don't have autonomy. It did not reach level 3, where they were communicative and informative so that they can take action, and then certainly not at a level 4, which is being critical and have that critical disaster literacy. And that became a very significant finding for us, because there may be a challenge or gaps in the way that disaster literacy was taught. So in terms of the factors, and we're winding up, the factors which contributed to disaster literacy levels, of course, we have occupation and education, and that's also connected to the socioeconomic status of persons. age, access to information. Persons did not have access to social media, and there is a digital divide in this particular community. Cultural beliefs and traditions. Culture provided a lens through which participants viewed disasters, and it affected their perception of risk, their preparedness, their measures, their response strategies, and their access to resources to support them through any particular disaster. Their physical ability, we found that persons with physical ability had less access to disaster-related information. The strategies used by residents in the Pinal-Debe region to mitigate, to prepare, respond, and recover from disasters, there was a heavy reliance on government and the Pinal-Debe Regional Cooperation to enact responses and recovery measures. Community-based organizations provided some support, but it was just short-term. We also found that there was low levels of efficacy in addressing issues related to flooding, and that while all of those things were occurring, there was a high presence of structures within the community that could support disaster literacy. So there are some recommendations that came out of the study, and I'll just go through it, and you could perhaps end with the imperatives. So there is a need for us to build community resilience through building social capital and developing a very highly contextual disaster literacy program or training program. And we believe that the next step for this project is to engage with people within the community in a participatory action project where they themselves can identify what are the gaps around disaster literacy and their understanding of it. What do they need to move from a level 1 to a level 4 in that model of disaster literacy? And by doing this as a participatory action project within the community and then doing train the trainers, we can therefore leverage on the strong structures which exist within rural communities, community-based organizations, religious organizations, and so on, to be able to increase and improve disaster literacy.
And then last but not least, as far as implications for the study, obviously the one that you see there is just generally speaking, completion of the survey, enticing people to take it in the first place, because at the same time it's, what do they benefit from it? And that's one thing that I've always learned, and that was taught to me, that, you can't just go into these communities, take all this information away, and then they get nothing in return. So it's we need to have more of this participatory action research. And then one interesting thing for future research is focusing in on specific marginalized groups. So the biggest one that comes to mind in Trinidad and Tobago is the big influx of Venezuelan migrants, because they are so close to each other. And then, the perceptions of them as an immigrant in general, and searching for jobs, and then not knowing about all these flooding disasters on top of that, and then also a gendered analysis as well. So the experiences between men and women could be more incorporated for future research.
So just to conclude, we've spent 2 days really listening and learning about different measures that can be taken to combat and to adapt to climate change. But the reality is, unless people in communities connect their lived experiences with climate change, they may not be motivated to adapt and to adopt strategies. And I think that's the gap that this project will be filling. This is the first study that has ever been done in the Caribbean about disaster literacy levels, and we hope that this project will expand to other communities that also experience similar disasters. Thank you.